Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about my 4th degree tear and rectal tear 6 years later. I cannot believe that my firstborn son is turning 6 so soon and that our experience together is 6 years old. It's wild to think about. A little bit of a tradition now annually to make this video around this time. I get a lot of messages, especially on my old videos, from other women who have gone through very similar experiences, and not that I like ever wish this experience on anyone, but I think that talking about it and continuing to talk about it, I would hope that it makes for a community, and it makes women who have gone through this experience feel a little less alone. I think also I've gotten messages from women who say like, oh, I'm so glad to see your, I don't know, 5-year update and how well you're doing, because I just went through this and I'm so scared and I'm so nervous about how I'm gonna heal and what the future looks like. And so to hear a positive story feels really good. And I am so happy that I can tell my story and share my trauma in a way that helps other people, you know? So in case you're brand new here, hi, my name is Erica. I had a vaginal delivery with my first son. It ended with a 4th degree tear and a rectal tear. The whole birthing experience was very traumatic, and I feel like I'm still processing it 6 years later, and every year I have more hindsight and am able to look at it with sort of a clearer head. I then I elected to have a cesarean section with my second son, and then I had a repeat section with my third baby, my first daughter. And that's a whole other story, the C-sections and that stuff. But today we'll just talk about the 4th degree tear and the rectal tear. Okay. 6 years later, I have some good news. The good news is that everything is still functioning the way it should. So if you have a 4th degree tear, your vaginal opening has torn open, as has all of, like, from my understanding, the tissue, the skin, obviously, the fascia, like it's torn right on open from your vaginal opening all the way to your rectum. And I had a rectal tear. So the tear for me didn't just stop at my butt. It kept going. It kept going, friends. And so there are 4 degrees of tear, I believe. And if you get a rectal tear in conjunction with your vaginal tear, I don't know. It's like you hit the 5th level. I hit the 5th level. So while it was happening, I didn't know it was happening. I didn't know it was happening, and my midwife did ask, oh, it's looking like we need to give you an episiotomy too. Do you want that? And I was like, sure, because at this point I had been pushing actively for close to 3 hours. Eventually my doctor came in, like, let's just get the baby out sort of thing. He came out, everything tore open. My doctor then spent close to an hour stitching everything back up. Again, had no idea that really any of this was happening. I do remember after that birth, after he came out, just feeling like, oh, thank God that is over. Thank God. And I was saying out loud, thank God, thank God, thank God that's over. And I didn't understand the severity of the moment. I didn't really understand the severity of like what was happening. Luckily, my firstborn was fine. He was totally fine, thank God. And they were like this close to calling an emergency C-section, but everything was fine. Okay. The next day my doctor comes in, she sort of explains what happened, but even then, in that moment, I still didn't really understand the severity of it. All I knew was that, oh my gosh, I have so many stitches down there. I can barely sit up. I can barely walk. Barely. I can make it to the bathroom. Barely. I cannot sit down. It is so incredibly painful. We get discharged from the hospital and they say like, oh, use a sitz bath to like keep that whole down region clean. But just sitting down when you have that many stitches holding together your nether regions is otherworldly. And so I just remember crying one night and saying to my mom, because at the time we were living at my parents', like, I can't sit, I can't lay down, I can't care for my baby, like I can do nothing. Like this is so painful. And I remember saying to my mom and my husband, like, I'm never having any children ever again. Luckily C-sections are a thing, and I was able to go down that route because there was no way I was going to have another vaginal birth. And a question I often get is, oh, did they say why you had a 4th degree tear, why you had a rectal tear, like why, is there something that you could have done? And you know, it's funny because during the entire pregnancy, my doctor and everyone who I love, everyone was like, oh, you're a Pilates instructor and a dancer, so like everything is like really tight, but also like, you know, stretchy, like you're limber, and like I'm sure it'll be great, like you have such a good connection with your core. And then it was sort of the opposite. After I had the baby, it was like, oh, well, because you're so, everything is so like fit and tight and like nothing could stretch. And so I don't know, I walked away from that whole thing thinking like, okay, well, I honestly think it's just like, you can't predict it, like it happened, and that's just how my body is / was, and that's how it tore. Like that's just how it happened. So it took me about, I would say it took me about 4 months to be able to walk in a way that felt semi-normal. And it took me, I think it was like 6 to 9 months to like be able to like actually take him out for walks and like, you know, like go out into the world. And then it was like, I didn't feel normal until like well after the 12-month mark. Like 12 months, I was like, okay, like things are functioning, like I feel good. Luckily, and I did not know this at the time, luckily I healed very, very well. And I'm so glad that I didn't really do a lot of research into 4th degree tears and what can go wrong in the healing process, because that would have freaked me out. And it wasn't until years later actually that, you know, I was reading people's comments and everyone was saying, oh, how are you healing, how's things going, and like just seeing everyone's threads in the comments under my videos and realizing and then doing research that like, wow, I'm very lucky that I healed so well, because a lot of women don't. And a lot of complications can come up, and that's something that I always have in the back of my head, because I don't feel like, I unfortunately feel like after you have a 4th degree tear, like such a traumatic tear in your body, especially then if you also have a rectal tear, that like, I don't think you ever feel out of the clear after that, or out of the woods after that. I'm constantly thinking like, is it gonna tear again? Is something gonna happen where it tears open? Am I more susceptible to tear? And that was something that I had spoken with to my OB about when I was pregnant with my 2nd son, and she was like, listen, you can try for another vaginal delivery, but you have more of a likelihood to tear, being that you tore so terribly with the first. And I was like, well, I mean, I don't need more convincing than that. I'm like, I'm not doing that again. So I did have the C-section. I didn't know too that like with a rectal tear that you can have complications where like if it doesn't heal properly, like you can have a lot of problems and issues, as you can well imagine. So 6 years later, I can confidently say that everything still looks good down there. Every OB, and I actually have an OB appointment coming up in a couple weeks, and that'll be really interesting. If I was filming this a little bit later, I could have also mentioned, but my OB will obviously take a look because it's like a wellness visit. But every time that she has looked down there, I mean, I just had my 3rd baby, and although I didn't really have very many vaginal checks because we knew that we were having a C-section, every time that I have in the past, like everything has looked fine, and everything is healing fine, which is such a blessing. And after having my 3rd baby, I'm 35 years old, almost 36. Like things just in general are not as tight and right as they used to be, and I'm not gonna blame that on the 4th degree tear and the rectal tear. I think just after having so many babies, like my body is just like, my pelvic floor isn't really strong, and that's tough. I think that the 4th degree tear obviously didn't help. I feel relatively lucky with my pelvic floor in that, so I was a Pilates instructor. I do know how to engage my pelvic floor. I probably should be doing more pelvic floor exercises than I actually do. But if you've had a 4th degree tear, I mean, really any postpartum woman should be going to see, and I wish it was, you know, just like part of postpartum care, it so should be, to see a pelvic floor therapist to get help with your pelvic floor, because regardless of what type of birthing experience you have, your pelvic floor is being affected because you carried your baby. So yeah, I feel like where my pelvic floor is, like it's in a relatively good spot. I don't have any sort of major accidents, which is good. I will say that I do get nervous sometimes going to the bathroom thinking like, is there going to be, you know, like, am I just gonna like tear open, and like how well is everything holding together? But again, I haven't had any sort of major issues. And every time I've gotten checked at the OB, she said that everything has looked really good, and again, healed super, super well. So I guess I'm lucky in that my first birthing experience, my first labor and delivery, that happened during my first, if that makes sense. Like I'm lucky I had the 4th degree tear first and not last, because I don't know if my body would have healed so well, like if it was my 3rd pregnancy and 3rd baby. So I hope that comes as a relief if you are currently in the middle of recovering from a 4th degree tear and a rectal tear, and you're like, am I gonna feel like myself in 5 years? Am I gonna feel better as the years go on? And I would say my hope would be that you do, and 6 years out, I do. Just like overall, I'm not the same, I don't have the same abilities that I did 6 years ago, as someone who's very active and like grew up as a dancer and, you know, like super active. It's, you know, I just can't do a lot of the things anymore. I just don't have time as a mom of 3. But luckily everything down there seems to work really fine. Nothing's ever painful. Nothing ever hurts weirdly, which is good. And it's just always something that I check. And I would say if you are currently, if you've had a 4th degree tear or rectal tear, keep it in the back of your mind. Go to your annual OB checkups. Always make sure that everything looks good. And if you are currently in the healing process from having a 4th degree tear, just know that it will get better. It will. Take it slow, as slow as you can, because you want to just give your body the time to heal and heal properly. I know that that's so hard, especially if you have other kids, because life slows down for no one, especially for moms who just given birth, which is so wrong. But try to give yourself as much grace as possible during the healing process. And then when you can, start strengthening up your abdominals again. Start strengthening up your pelvic floor again, just to help support your insides as much as possible. All right, friends. So that is my 4th degree tear and rectal tear update. 4 years later, 4 years later, 6 years later, oh my goodness. 6 years later, my son is turning 6. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye, friends.